Hey buddy. I know that Piers Morgan was always somewhat controversial, but he used to be a legitimate presenter of news commentary and a respectable interviewer. I mean, the man used to have his own television show for at least 3 years, and he was also on multiple other programs. Now, I don't watch television myself, but I have heard that that's a very big deal. The dude used to interview politicians and very influential people in the public sphere. 5 years ago, I would have never bet that Piers Morgan would be doing a schlock YouTube series by now where he invites on panels of guests to just yell over each other in a heated dramatic argument like they're on an episode of Jerry Springer.
You're just
It's not psychic ability.
You're just pathetic. Nobody's going to listen to you. You're an
Randy, are you
aggressive,
going to have an
insecure
argument?
man.
I'm going to tell you what's going
We're
to
not
happen. This
taking
is
So naturally, when I saw that Piers Morgan had invited Zahi Hawass of the Egyptian Antiquities Department onto his show to debate with two alternative history YouTubers, Jimmy and Dan, I got really nervous about how this was going to go down. I've been sitting on this video for a couple of months now because watching this episode was so frustrating.
I answered your question, and I said,
You're saying we have not
You
gone in
can
and
say,
explored
go
that
in.
chamber, is that correct?
Can you please let me to answer you?
Yes.
I already answered you.
The momentum for this panel started when Zahi Hawass was interviewed by Joe Rogan back in May. On this podcast, Zahi kind of embarrassed himself. I don't think he understood the difference between a podcast and a television interview because he didn't bring any material to show the audience. He just kept referencing his book as his main resource.
We found the tools that the Egyptian used to cut the stones.
Are these photos of these tools available online? Can we look at them?
No, in my book, Giza and the Pyramids, I found in situ remains of the ram.
Are there photos of this?
Of course, in my book.
Okay, can't find anything.
It's in my book.
But
It's in my book, Giza and the Pyramids. If you go to my book, you'll find out.
Are these the tools?
No, this is tools for artists. The tools in our book, which is big diorite tools and big flint tools. Big ones.
Why is this not online?
We'll never put them online. It's in my book.
Right, but why aren't these tools online? That's all I'm asking.
Ask the people online, but they are remains in my book.
Where's that at?
It's an Abu Sir. I found
But
it.
are there photographs online?
Yes, in my book. I don't go online. Why I have to go online? I go to my book.
He contradicted himself a few times and even made some extremely egotistical statements.
We published a book. 1,000 pages. This book is the Bible of the pyramids of Giza Plateau because most of the information that's written on pyramids are wrong.
Most of it?
Most of it.
In archaeology books?
In archaeology books.
Really?
Except me and Mark Leaner. And I want to tell you one thing also.
Okay.
I am the only Egyptologist who have an open mind.
Really?
And this interview got the alternative history community pretty riled up. Debunking Dan, for example, made a 2-part video calling Zahi Hawass a fraud, which is pretty extreme. So he only really came to the Rogan interview prepared to answer questions about his book, and he didn't actually expect to have to bring material for their broader discussion. Joe Rogan would go on to call this the worst interview he's ever done, which I don't even think that that's true, but it is a very bad interview. Piers Morgan started off his episode by interviewing Zahi Hawass one-on-one, asking him his opinion about the Joe Rogan interview.
When I give any talk about pyramids, I expect the person who interviewed me to read about pyramids or to read about our work. I am sorry, when I did this last interview, I didn't see that Mr. Rogan did really read anything that we published.
And one of the last questions that Piers Morgan asked Zahi before the panel discussion began was about his new theory that the Great Pyramid was built by 10,000 skilled workers and artisans, instead of the original theory that the Great Pyramid was built by 100,000 involuntary servants. Now, I have to explain here that this is not actually a new theory, as Piers Morgan implies. People have been throwing this idea around for a really long time now. But what's different here is that Zahi has claimed to have found a gravesite that includes the remains of 10,000 workers who were paid to work on different monuments, such as the pyramids.
We found the tombs of the pyramid builders at Giza. Big, major, important discovery. We found the tombs in the upper cemetery for the technicians with titles in hieroglyphic. Each title has to do with building the pyramid. The lower symmetry for the workmen who moved the stones.
But this is actually an interesting subject for debate because, in my opinion, just because we've found a gravesite that includes the remains of people who were paid to work on the Great Pyramid, that doesn't mean that involuntary servants weren't also used. As Zahi said,
if there were slaves, the workmen will never be buried in the shadow of the pyramids. If there were slaves, they will never prepare their tombs for eternity like kings and queens. I can tell you that pyramids were built by the ancient Egyptians because all the names that we found were Egyptian names.
So think about it. If they wouldn't bury the remains of involuntary laborers in the shadow of the pyramid, then that means that they would be buried somewhere else. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I think that it's possible that this concept has only really been recently introduced to us in this way because it's become a point of Egyptian national pride to sort of distance themselves from the concept of involuntary labor.
We have to understand the meaning of slavery in ancient Egypt. There was no slavery in ancient Egypt.
Anyways, Piers Morgan then introduces the other guests and asks Jimmy what he thinks about the 10,000 skilled worker theory, opening up the topic to debate. And this almost gets me excited because this is a pretty interesting debate topic. Zahi believes that the workers had to have been skilled and paid because they were treated like citizens of Egypt and buried in the shadow of the pyramid.
There were no slaves. If there were slaves, the workmen will never be buried in the shadow of the pyramids. If there were slaves, they will never prepare their tombs for eternity like kings and queens.
But other people think that the original theory that they were involuntary laborers makes more sense because some of them were paid only with beer and bread. And that's not exactly going to pay the mortgage, if you know what I mean. And the amount of labor required to move over 2 million multi-ton stones about 300 feet up would require a lot of people. But Jimmy ignores the question and completely changes the subject, going into a rant about the void that was found in the Great Pyramid by Scanned Pyramids Project, demanding answers from Zahi about when they're finally going to explore this hidden chamber.
This Scanned Pyramids Project, that initial discovery was back in 2016, and it was corroborated into a published study in 2017. That's 9 years ago. That's almost a decade. And I'm trying to understand why we wouldn't have drilled a half-inch diameter hole and sent in a endoscope camera into this hidden chamber. Why haven't we drilled into that hidden chamber? When will we do it? And the third question is, has it already been done so in secret?
Wow.
And this pretty much sets the tone for the whole rest of the episode. It's a hostile and unfriendly dog pile. Jimmy more or less just berates Zahi the entire time, and Piers Morgan takes his side just to stir up drama.
Can you
It's been 9 years.
do that? We can.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I mean,
brother.
look, we've sent
9
rockets.
years.
We've sent
No, no,
rockets
you
to
are
the.
wrong.
Hang on,
You are
Doctor.
wrong.
Doctor
I'm
Hawass,
sorry.
we have sent rockets to the moon since the 60s. I mean, the idea we can get to the moon in space rockets, but we can't get inside a chamber of a tomb in a pyramid. I mean, come on.
Now, I don't think that anyone could argue that Zahi isn't one of the most foremost experts on Egyptology. He clearly is. But the greater archaeological community can get really frustrated by the way that he completely dismisses and buries studies that present different ideas from the ones that he has published in his own books. And I get that. I've called Zahi Hawass a gatekeeper multiple times. But to a certain degree, I also understand that that's his job. His ego is really annoying, but his ego is what makes him so good at that job. The Egyptians Antiquities Department is not just in charge of preserving ancient Egyptian artifacts and sites. Their job is also to preserve Egyptian cultural identity. When random researchers come in and suggest that the ancient Egyptians couldn't have built the Great Pyramids, for example, obviously, the Egyptian people are going to feel very insulted by that. Being angry at Zahi Hawass for being a gatekeeper is kind of like being angry at a cloud for raining on you. Villainizing him and throwing gotcha questions at him doesn't actually achieve anything, and in the end is probably just going to make you look like you're being unfair.
Yes or no, Zahi?
Zahi Hawass isn't just operating in his own best interest, he has the best interest of all of Egypt in mind. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, and I'm not saying that you're a good or bad person for agreeing or disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that that's the way it is. That's the reality of the situation. So anyways, back to the show. Alternative history has become a really popular subject online, so I understand why Piers Morgan would want to do an episode like this. But my biggest problem with this panel is that popular YouTubers who enjoy the hobby of questioning the historical narrative have no business being paired up with the former minister of Egyptian antiquities as if they're equal experts. I don't even understand the logic of this. If this were structured like a normal civil discussion, that would be one thing. But at least one of the panel members here took advantage of this opportunity and used it to berate Zahi Hawass as if he were on trial.
And when we can
It's been 9 years.
do that, we can.
Yeah,
9
come
years,
on. I mean,
brother.
look, we said
9
that's-
years.
And I don't think that this actually achieves anything. I'm actually worried that this just makes the alternative history community look bad. Bright Insight Jimmy and Dedunking Dan have both been on the Piers Morgan show before. They were on a panel with two other YouTubers, Mini Minuteman Milo and Dr. Flint Dibble, discussing the Italian research team's finding of the 2-kilometer deep city under the Giza Plateau. I did my own video on this claim, you might remember, and I'm really skeptical. And this earlier discussion panel made a lot more sense to me, because even though Flint and Milo are both formally educated in archaeology, they're at least YouTubers. In this panel, Jimmy and Dan kept insisting that they want to see an exploration team go under the pyramids to confirm the Italian team's findings, and Flint explained why archaeology doesn't simply operate on the whim of every theory and finding that's proposed by researchers. It was a really balanced episode. But this second panel with Zahi Hawass, there was no way that this was going to be balanced. Anyways, after Jimmy was asked that question about 10,000 skilled workers, and then he immediately changed the subject with a long ranting question about exploring that void chamber in the Great Pyramid, Zahi Hawass very clearly gives Jimmy an answer.
We still have the scan pyramid team are working. You have to be patient. You have to study how are you going to drill, or the new techniques that they're using, like ultrasound and infrared penetrating radar. You do not need to drill anymore. You can see what's behind a wall.
Zahi went on to explain that the teams who discovered this void and the teams who have found other voids are still working on their studies. And they're still in the process of trying to decide how they would even get into that chamber in the first place, or if it would be better to employ other types of scans first. And Piers Morgan even acknowledges that Zahi Hawass answered the question.
You can see what's behind a wall.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to have that clarified.
Piers Morgan then asks Zahi a question based on something that Graham Hancock said on an earlier episode of the show.
Can I just ask you just as to whether you believe this is true, that the Great Pyramid of Giza is claimed to have a correlation with the Earth's circumference and polar radius, based on the idea that multiplying the pyramid's perimeter by 43,200 equals the Earth's equatorial circumference, and multiplying its height by 43,200 equals the Earth's polar radius, so that this number, 43,200, is also related to the precession of the Earth's axis. Is that all true?
Zahi says that he's never heard this theory before, but he hears theories about the pyramid every day. But he says that he'll consider the theory if they give him the information about it and give him time to study it.
You know, I'm not objecting any theory, but you have to understand, every day I hear a theory about a pyramid.
If that theory is true, it is mind-blowing. Do you think it's true?
Send it to me, I will study it, and I will...
And that's exactly how a scientist should answer a question like that. I mean, it's fun to play around with ideas like that, but it's also kind of silly to entertain every single theory that's thrown at you, especially when you don't understand the context of it. The 43,200 thing sounds like totally random nonsense the way that Piers Morgan presented it here. And for somebody who doesn't spend any time paying attention to every single theory that's thrown around in the alternative history community, they have no reason to just immediately trust this information as if it's an absolute fact. So Piers Morgan shouldn't really be acting shocked that Zahi Hawass doesn't want to share an opinion about this.
If that theory is true, it is mind-blowing. Do you think it's true?
Send it to me, I will study it, and I will...
You've not heard it?
I mean, this is an interesting theory, and there are reasons to believe that there might be something to this, but it's also just an idea. and it can't really be proven. And I mean, Piers Morgan only just heard this theory for the first time a few months earlier when interviewing Graham Hancock.
It's important because there is an obscure astronomical phenomenon called precession. It's a wobble on the axis of the Earth. This process of precession changes the star field at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. What we're looking at is a multiple of the number 72. 72 times 600 is 43,200.
Jimmy jumps into the conversation explaining that this is a number that we see in several places in history.
It's the same number on the Sumerian Kings list. 43,200 has been seen in ancient history inexplicably.
But then he changes the subject again.
Real quick, I'm sorry, but Zahi, you didn't answer my prior question. Have you guys gone in and explored that hidden chamber? And if not, when will you be doing so? Because to be honest, we could do it by the end of the weekend. It's not difficult to drill a half-inch diameter hole and send in an endoscope here. So have we been in there? And if not, when are we going, brother? I need to know. This will answer all of our questions. If you want to squash debate involving conspiracy theorists and everything, all we got to do is go in and look. We know where it's at. We could drill a hole. This is doable.
Jimmy apparently wasn't listening to Zahi's answer earlier because he ends up asking the same question multiple times throughout the panel, insisting that Zahi give him an explanation as to why they have not drilled into this chamber yet. Now, a lot of people made fun of Zahi's response to this.
I answered your question, and I said,
You're saying we have not gone in and explored that chamber, is that correct?
Can you please let me to answer you?
Yes.
I already answered you.
But he's right. He did answer, and his answer was fine. But I guess it just wasn't the answer that Jimmy was expecting, or the one that Jimmy wanted.
Right now, we are discussing and studying how we are going to get in. You cannot just go in directly like this. You have to make a study. You have to research it. You have to decide as a scientist, when can you do it?
Like I said, it's literally Zahi Hawass's job to preserve Egyptian sites and relics. Drilling a hole into the Great Pyramid of Giza is the exact opposite of preserving a historical site.
This year, 2025, is the year that we are studying how can we enter inside these voids. And he said 9 years. Yes, it can take more than 9 years. This is the pyramid of Egypt. This is something valuable. This is one of the 7 wonders of the world. Yep. You just can't go and boom and drill like this. You have to be sure that this drill is important to discover something.
Look, I know Zahi sucks, all right? He's dishonest, he's egotistical. He may have even set Egyptology back like 50 or 60 years. But even if he wanted to drill a hole, he couldn't just do it. The theory that there's a hidden chamber in the Great Pyramid based on a void that was found on a scan is based off of one study by one team. If Zahi Hawass just drilled a hole into the Great Pyramid based off of that, it would set a really dangerous precedent. I mean, imagine if the Egyptian Antiquities Department just drilled a hole into the Great Pyramid every single time a research team came up with the idea of a new hidden chamber in the Great Pyramid. What kind of message would that send to later generations if they come and look at the pyramid and it's just covered in drill holes? It's one of the great wonders of the ancient world. It has to be treated with respect. It's disrespectful to the monument itself to demand to just go in like a bunch of arrogant cowboys and drill holes in ancient history just because you are personally curious and impatient. That's not how archaeology works. Pierce then brings Dan into the discussion by asking him what his opinion is about what's been going on so far in the conversation.
Dan, what would you like to say to Dr. Hawass? Because there's been a kind of raging conflict between what people see as the establishment Egyptologists who have kind of access and control, and then all you guys who would probably love to get that kind of access and control but don't have it. What do you view about what he's been saying?
Dan then also completely changes the subject and asks Zahi a totally unrelated question.
When you were on Joe Rogan, you said that you didn't know what Zep Tepi was, and I figured I would give you a chance. I would imagine as the premier Egyptologist in the world, you do know the Egyptian creation myth. Would you mind just explaining it to us real quick so that to kind of vindicate yourself and show the world you do know what Zep Tepi is?
This was something from the Joe Rogan podcast interview that the alternative history community got really upset about. Anybody who's following people like Graham Hancock, Robert Bouval, John Anthony West, or any of those other prominent alternative history researchers is probably really familiar with the concept of Zep Tepi, the first time, which many of these people consider to be the Egyptian creation myth. The term Zep Tepi has been used by some Egyptologists to describe the Egyptian creation myth, but it's not the term that Egyptologists use. And the term Zep Tepi also has other uses as well. The term Zep Tepi, also pronounced Sip Tepi, just means the first time. and it can refer to the first time that anything happens. It can refer to the very first time that bread was ever baked, or it can refer to the first time that a specific person baked bread in their lifetime. Zep-Tepi can refer to the first time somebody rode a horse, or the first time somebody sat on a throne. The first time I heard the term Zep-Tepi was in reference to the very first Egyptian kingdom. The first time Egypt was a kingdom. The term Zep-Tepi only really shows up maybe like a couple of times in Egyptian hieroglyphs to describe the first time that certain kings did something specific in their lifetime. So this expectation that Zahi Hawass should know that people use the term Zep-Tepi as shorthand for the Egyptian creation myth is really unrealistic. And it's really arrogant to present this question to Zahi Hawass as if he has to answer it to vindicate himself. This kind of just serves as an example of how people in the alternative history community can become so enveloped in their own version of Egyptology that they completely lose perspective about what terms and concepts mainstream Egyptologists actually use. But with that being said, when Joe Rogan asked Zahi this question about Zep-Tepi, he got visibly and noticeably upset and he protested.
Tell me about Zep-Tepi.
What's Zep-Tepi? What's this?
You never heard about, have you heard about, about the King's List, right? The old King's List that goes back 30,000 whatever years.
Who said that?
You never seen it? It's not in hieroglyphs?
This is not true.
It's not true?
No. It's speculation from people who knows nothing about history.
And I think that this is what people were reacting negatively to. If you ask me, it looked like Zahi Hawass was getting defensive. And it looked like maybe he actually had heard this term before, but he was pretending that he had never heard it for some reason.
This is not true. There is no at all a name that you told me. I never heard of this name.
You've never heard of that before?
No, and this is not true.
What do you mean it's not true? I mean, I'm getting this off of...
It never happened at all.
Okay, I'm not saying it happened. I'm just saying that this is something that's referred to.
Why do I have to go to a myth of people create stories?
If you go to Wikipedia...
I don't care about Wikipedia.
I understand.
I care about what I see in my eyes.
I mean, if you ask me, Zahi should have said that he has heard that term before and he knows that people use it to describe the Egyptian creation myth, but that's not what the term really means. I mean, use that as a learning opportunity. But when Dan asks Zahi that same question here, the way that he answers is much more fair.
No, I mean, I know about the ancient Egyptian creation, but maybe I don't know this term. But what I'm saying, what this has to do with what we are discussing now.
Now, in a normal discussion, when somebody says that they're aware of something, but they're just not familiar with the specific term that you used to describe it, the honorable thing to do is to explain what that term means and why there are so many people that use it. But lording the term Zep-Tepi over Zahi Hawass as if it's a gotcha doesn't achieve anything.
It's a very important lens to use when you're interpreting these artifacts. So when you were on Joe Rogan and he asked you what it was and you said you didn't know what it was. So honestly, if you wouldn't mind it's a good chance to vindicate yourself.
No, I teach the Egyptian creation, but I'm saying this term that you're talking about, I never heard of it.
Now, it's one thing to laugh about this in your own video or to laugh about it on the forums or whatever, because it is funny that Zahi doesn't know this term. And it's really bizarre that he's acting as if it's some offensive concept that shouldn't even be discussed. I don't know why he's doing this. But to mock him to his face like this by implying that he needs to vindicate himself in front of an audience, that's overly hostile. Now, Dan does end up giving a really good answer to the question about the theory about skilled workers building the pyramids.
To me, that's ludicrous. I mean, I worked construction for a long time and they're using the food and the graves and stuff. And I mean, I saw many construction workers eating McDonald's while there was other construction workers eating steak. It just depends on if he's a foreman, if he's an engineer, or if he's just a grunt. The painters don't eat as good as the electricians, who don't eat as good as the engineers and the architects. So having 10,000 people buried in the shade of the pyramid, in a grave, mind you, that only says they worked for Khufu, it never says that they built the pyramids. So that's a stretch. It's an assumption that these are pyramid builder graves. But in addition to that, there could be graves of tens of thousands of slaves off the site that haven't been discovered that were doing all of the grunt work while somebody else was holding the plumb bob. To me, it's ludicrous to say there were no slaves involved.
So this panel discussion wasn't a total loss. But then Jimmy chimes in again to argue that there are periods of missing history from Egypt which make it impossible to know exactly how the pyramids were built.
The Great Pyramids of Giza were allegedly created by the Old kingdom, after the pyramid's construction, there was 3 other changes of kingdom within Egypt. Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and between them are missing chapters of human history within Egypt. Between the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom is approximately 126 years of completely missing history. And then between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom is approximately 186 years of missing history. In each of those 2 chapters of missing history, that's longer than any human lifespan. That's multiple generations, which means that nobody was alive afterwards to say what was happening before. We have absolutely no idea how the pyramids were constructed, how, or even precisely when.
And this is a really weak argument. A couple hundred years of missing history sounds really sexy when you're trying to put together a YouTube video about a historical mystery. I know because I play that game in my history videos. But when you're talking about a literal academic study of history, that kind of argument falls flat on its face. Yes, there are really sparse written records in a few places in Egyptian history, suggesting that something happened, but those gaps in history only really represent a loss of continuity in government. They don't mean that Egypt just stopped existing. The people living there were still Egyptians living in Egypt. An entire culture doesn't just completely forget its history because of a couple of hundred years of hard times. And I mean, hell, the pyramids were still there. Everyone could still see them every day. It's not like they disappeared. The people of Egypt still would have felt a deep connection to their temples and their monuments. And it's not like we know nothing at all about those gaps in history. The records are just really sparse. But Egyptologists are always in the process of studying those time periods and trying to piece them back together. But with that being said, Jimmy is more or less right here. There are not any written records that explain how the pyramids of Giza were built. That's what makes the pyramids of Giza such a beautiful mystery in the first place. I'm just saying that this missing time argument doesn't actually add anything to that mystery. I think we just need to understand here that Zahi Hawass is just playing his role as a member of the Antiquities Department of Egypt by pretending as if this mystery is solved and everybody knows the answers already. Of course, we all know that that's not true. It is still a mystery. Nobody knows for sure exactly how the pyramids of Giza were built. But that's another aspect of the mainstream audiences to information like this. Most people don't actually like mysteries. Most people like to just have an answer handed to them so they can stop thinking about something. Part of the reason why people like Zahi Hawass even exist in the mainstream at all is because mysteries make most people feel uncomfortable. So if you come out confidently explaining that you know for sure how something was done in its historical context, that's just gonna make normal people happy. It doesn't need to be a good answer, it just needs to be something that makes it feel like it's been solved and it's something that normal people don't need to think about anymore. Anyways, Jimmy doesn't leave it there. Jimmy once again presses Zahi Hawass into giving him an answer about drilling into the secret chamber in the Great Pyramid.
And again, I just would like your clarification. Are you saying that there has been no exploration into any of those hidden voids yet? Above the Grand Gallery, can you tell me in good faith that you're certain that nobody within the Egypt Ministry of Antiquities has explored that yet?
Okay, well, a lot to unpack there. So first of all...
Yes or no, Zahi?
You can't make this up. Now Jimmy's coming across as entirely unreasonable. And he's totally detracting from the flow of the conversation. Zahi shuts him down again, but this time he gets very angry that he's being accused of hiding things.
This conspiracy theory that you do have is wrong. Completely. We do not hide anything.
He then explains that there are a few records explaining how large stones were moved.
I can give you 3 evidence of moving stones. We have the Wadi al-Jarf papyri. Do you know anything about this papyri?
But as Zahi tries to answer, Jimmy tries to steamroll him again.
You have in the Middle Kingdom.
Right, and by the way, when it comes to that papyrus you keep talking about, it says absolutely, the word pyramid is not mentioned one single time.
Now Jimmy is right here. There are no written records from the Egyptians explaining how they managed to move 80-ton stones. The papyrus that Zahi is referring to only explains how they moved smaller limestone blocks. Zahi insists that he be allowed to answer, but Jimmy just takes it back to the hidden chamber question again.
I gave you the time to talk. Give me the time to answer you, please.
You never said yes or no, though, to that prior question.
Yes, he did answer. Why does Jimmy keep doing this? He's completely hijacking the panel discussion now. I mean, we could have had like 3 or 4 different discussions about separate topics by now. Why do we keep going back to the first one?
Zahi, if you would like to invite me out to show me, the exploration of this hidden void, I think it'd be various influencers within this community on the internet that are concerned that things have not been shared on the up and up.
I'd actually like to come.
I like you.
I have to ask here, as an influencer myself, Who gives a what influencers want? This is basically like a bullying tactic. Jimmy is implying here that as an influencer, he deserves an answer. Look, influencers are basically like a new phenomenon. They've only been around for a little over a decade. And in a decade from now, influencers might not even exist anymore. But the pyramids, on the other hand, have been around for thousands of years. And they might be around for thousands of years more. This is just coming across as pure arrogance, and it's making the entire alternative history community look bad. I want to know what's going on in that hidden void chamber in the Great Pyramid as much as the next guy, but we're never going to be allowed to know the answer to this if we keep asking these questions in such a hostile way. I'm worried that behaving in this way is just going to make Egyptologists think that people like Jimmy are just a threat to Egyptology, or maybe even an enemy to Egyptology. Dan gets in the last question. He asks Zahi how he believes the ancient Egyptians were able to so perfectly square the Great Pyramid.
As a guy who's worked construction a lot, there's one of the questions that unanswered about the construction of the pyramids. You can say that you know how they lifted the stones all you want, but the squaring of that edifice to itself, the Great Pyramid has about a 2-inch deviation on a 756-foot run. That's less than 1,000%. I would just like to know how the hell they got it so perfectly accurate in its own footprint. How do they square something on that size? It's like machine age accuracy on a gigantic scale.
And gives his own theory about how he thinks they had done it using light.
There's a mystery there.
What's your conclusion? No, I need to understand.
Honestly,
what do you want to say?
My conclusion is they used, the plates, the plate with many rings, like a target that you have in the museum in Cairo. I believe that was a target that they used a concave mirror and used the pinpoint of light to fill up circles at different distances.
But Zahi is so frustrated by this point in the panel that he just gets defensive and assumes that Dan is trying to argue that the ancient Egyptians could not have built the Great Pyramid. But Dan wasn't trying to say that.
What is your conclusion? If the Egyptians did not do this, who did it in your opinion?
I'm not saying the Egyptians didn't do it. I'm talking about specific problems and how to solve them.
Zahi showed this exact same level of frustration and defensiveness on the Rogan podcast when Joe tried to ask him how he believes the ancient Egyptians moved giant stones.
I understand the national project, but what I don't understand is the physics involved in moving 80-ton blocks 500 miles through the mountains.
If you don't believe on this.
It's not that I don't believe. It's not that I don't believe. I want you to explain to me how you think they did it.
And in my opinion, again, every time Zahi behaves this way, it comes across as if he's trying to hide something. I just wanted to thank my patrons and my channel members for supporting my videos. I could not do this without you. Everyone who supports my channel gets to watch my videos in advance, and you also get access to exclusive content. Patrons and Ko-fi members also get access to the Armored Skeptic Discord server. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Like I said, about 9 months ago, Piers Morgan interviewed Graham Hancock about his Ancient Apocalypse series. Piers Morgan brought this interview up with Zahi to ask him his opinion about something that Graham said. I mentioned at the beginning of my History is a Lie series that I don't really agree with a lot of the opinions from Graham Hancock and a lot of the other prominent figures in the alternative research community. But Graham Hancock is arguably the most influential person in alternative history today, and the online community repeats a lot of his talking points. Here's the clip that Piers showed.
What do you really want to achieve? What is the goal?
Most of all, what I would like to achieve is for archaeologists to engage with my work without smearing me, without calling me a racist and a white supremacist and a misogynist and an anti-Semite. All of these words were applied to me in the Society for American Archaeology open letter to Netflix, trying to persuade Netflix to reclassify my work as science fiction.
Why have they called you these things?
There's no basis in the series for that at all. And the only basis there is that I reported indigenous myths from the Americas, which talked about bearded, white-skinned people coming to America in the distant past and bringing knowledge and civilization with them. Those are indigenous myths.
This is a fairly disingenuous thing for Graham Hancock to say. I think that Graham Hancock has to understand that a lot of his work, by definition, completely contradicts the mainstream understanding of the capabilities of native groups throughout history, and it also contradicts a lot of native cultural beliefs. It is culturally insensitive to suggest that the natives of the Americas were incapable of building their own structures, their own monuments, and their own temples. And it is not clear that the natives had legends about white people with beards coming over to the Americas to teach them about architecture and science. That's more or less baseless conjecture. There are a couple of native groups that have legends about white people, but those native groups don't have any connections to the largest monuments in the Americas. I think that a better way for Graham Hancock to deal with this controversy is with a little bit of humility and self-awareness. I understand that it's really upsetting and disheartening when you're being accused of being a racist simply for describing your personal interpretation of history, but coming at this with so much hostility and demanding that people approach your work in a certain way is not actually going to help that perception that people have created around your work. When people are arguing that something that you've done is racist, what they're really saying is that what you've done is insensitive. So the best way to approach that is by displaying sensitivity. And I mean, let's be honest here, the people that made those accusations about his work were really just trying to shut his show down. They weren't making those arguments because they were genuinely concerned that he's a supremacist. I don't really think that Graham has necessarily demonstrated himself to be a supremacist. But these subjects have become much more sensitive over the years, and people are becoming a lot more aware of how supremacists use alternative history as a form of history revisionism. And I think that acting in denial about this kind of sensitivity is really only going to hurt you in the end, and it's going to alienate you from a huge chunk of your own audience. Graham Hancock defended himself against these accusations by insisting that these were indigenous myths from their own ancient past, but he used Quetzalcoatl as his only example.
Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mexico, is a classic example.
The problem with this is that it's not explicitly clear that Quetzalcoatl was ever described as a white man by the Aztecs. Quetzalcoatl was usually depicted as a snake god, and there are several depictions of him as a man with brown skin and even green skin. The fact is that the concept of ancient white people sharing knowledge with tribes around the world was already a widely disputed subject long before Graham Hancock ever suggested it in his books. And I think that it would help Graham Hancock a lot if he adjusted the way that he discussed this concept by adapting to this new sensitivity about it. I mean, people already struggle to take his work seriously as it is. The last thing he needs is to add the stigma of racism on top of that. Well, I can't believe that I just made a video defending Zahi Hawass after so many years of expressing frustration about him. What has happened to me? But I was having so much trouble believing the discourse that was going on around these interviews. I think that people memeing on Zahi is really funny. God, feel free to keep mocking this man. Zahi is a liar. Zahi is a gatekeeper, but Zahi is arguably the foremost expert on Egyptology. Yes, he's corrupt. Yes, he's dishonest. Yes, he shuts down theories and studies that contradict the accepted narratives around ancient Egypt. But also, that's just something that we have to accept about a character like that. Unfortunately, that's his job. That's who and what he is. And treating him with hostility is not going to change that. And it's not going to make it any easier for any of us to get better answers from him. And he's definitely not going to let you in on any secret knowledge. The way that this world works, you still have to treat characters like that with the respect that's due to their title. Even if he's a liar and an asshole, he's still an authority. If anything, behaving this way with people in these kinds of positions is just going to make it that much less likely that he'll ever want to do another public discussion like this again. And treating him like this potentially could also jeopardize a ton of future studies as well. I'm not saying that Zahi doesn't deserve this kind of treatment. I'm just saying that it's a really bad idea. I know that these guys felt special for getting to be among the first people to ever question him in public like this, but now I'm worried that Zahi will never join another panel like this again. I mean, think about the next guy. Think about the next group of influencers that get the opportunity to talk to Zahi, but he turns it down because he was so upset about the way that you treated him in this interview. Most of the points and arguments that Jimmy and Dan made on this panel were correct, respect, and Zahi was very likely being dishonest here. I'm just worried that what happened on this panel did more damage than it did good. But tell me what you think. Does Zahi Hawass deserve to be treated like this in public? Does he deserve our respect? Or should people just be more strategic with the way that they engage with him? Let me know in the comments below.